This episode is brought to you by the Virtual Excellence Academy. If 2025 is the year that you finally want to leave your 9-to-5 job and become a fully remote freelancer so you can live anywhere and travel the world, then this is for you. My friend, Hannah Dixon, the founder of the Virtual Excellence Academy, who you've heard on the Maverick Show, has helped over 30,000 people leave their 9-to-5 job and build a location-independent freelance business. And she is now offering a completely free training to show you how you can do it too with the skills you already have and start landing your first clients right away. The training is virtual, so you can attend from anywhere, and it's happening January 20th to 24th. And you can register for free at themaverickshow.com/virtual. Now, you're going to want to sign up early because you get immediate access to a supportive community, and you can pair up with an accountability partner to make the most of the training. So if you want to make 2025 the year that you start your location-independent freelance business, register now at themaverickshow.com/virtual. And now, here's a clip of what's coming up on today's episode. The first time I went to Kenya, which was 2018, a Ugandan friend of mine that I also know from nomading was in Kampala in Uganda. And she was like, dude, if you are in Nairobi, you got to come to Kampala. It's super close. You can stay at my place. I'll take you around and I'll show you Uganda. I was like, done. And so I went to Uganda and I only went for 4 nights, but it was one of the most unbelievable 4 nights of travel I have ever had. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. So she's taking me out to the nightclubs till 6 in the morning. And I am the only non-Ugandan person in any of these clubs, you know. I mean, she's taking me around. We're doing the local transportation on the matatus, which are like these shared vans, which are like packed in with 12 people. And some dude's got a couple chickens he's bringing into the van. I mean, like really local stuff, you know.
This is the Maverick Show, where you'll meet today's most interesting location-independent entrepreneurs and world travelers, and learn the strategies and tactics they use to succeed. And now, here's your host, Matt Bowles.
Hey everybody, it's Matt Bowles. Welcome to the Maverick Show. On this episode, the tables are turned, and I'm the one being interviewed by Brittany Braddock of the Manifest Travel Podcast. Brittany is a dear friend of mine, and for this conversation, we are in person, literally sitting on the couch in her living room. This originally aired on her podcast, Manifest Travel. It's a fun conversation, and she asked me some questions I've never been asked before on a podcast, so I think you're really going to enjoy it. And if you do like Brittany's interview style, I encourage you to subscribe to her show, Manifest Travel. It's one of the travel podcasts that I listen to consistently because she's a very thoughtful host. She herself is a queer traveler, so she has a number of episodes that center queer travel experiences. But in general, she finds interesting people and asks substantive questions about travel. You'll recognize a few of her guests because they've been on the Maverick Show. She's interviewed people like Deani Hall and Nora Dunn, but the super majority of her guests will be totally new for you because they've never been on the Maverick Show. So if you enjoy this conversation, then wherever you're listening to this episode, just type in Manifest Travel, and there you can subscribe to Brittany's show as well. And now, without further ado, please enjoy Brittany Braddock interviewing me on the Manifest Travel Podcast.
Welcome, Matt, to the Manifest Travel Podcast. I am so honored that you are here today in person for not only my first ever in-person interview for the podcast, but also the first recording for season 2. So thank you for being here.
Well, I am a huge fan of the Manifest Travel Podcast and of you personally, Brittany. So the pleasure is all mine. Super excited to be here in person with you.
So to kick things off, I want to get your travel origin story and sort of when and how you were introduced to travel and what inspired you to prioritize it in such a major way in your life.
So I've gone through different let's call it seasons of life, shall we say. I would say if I think all the way back, I did not do much international travel as a kid growing up. But when I got into college, I had the ability to study abroad, and that changed the whole game. So I got to go to Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland for a year. And while I was there during that year, I was able to take the month of the winter break. And my roommate and I, who didn't know each other before that trip, but he was also Irish American like me and was studying abroad there, he and I decided, let's take this month and just do a Eurorail trip through Europe. And we just bought a Eurorail pass. At the time, it was like hop on, hop off across 17 countries. And we just went, and it was just mind-blowing. And I think once you do that, it's never the same as it was before then. So that, I think, was really, really pivotal. And then I got into another study abroad semester program after that. So I was out of my main university for 20 straight months. And people were like, is this guy ever coming back? And the next study abroad program that I did was a peace and conflict resolution semester program that was focused on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And that took place mostly in Washington, D.C., but it included a 3-week trip to Israel, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and Egypt. And I did that for the following semester. So that was really a significant trip for me, particularly coming off of the Ireland trip, because I didn't give you the dates yet, but the Ireland trip, my junior year of college, was 1997-98. And one of the reasons why that year is significant is because that's the year that in Ireland, they negotiated and signed the Good Friday Peace Accords. So I was there following that process the whole year. I was in Belfast the day that they signed that, and I was really immersed in that. And also my undergraduate advisor back in the United States, he was Native American, right? So he was Lakota. So he and I started doing these comparative works looking at the British colonial processes over the Irish. Ireland was Britain's first colony, if people aren't aware of that. And then comparing that to the European colonial processes used over native nations here in the United States. So I had this whole framework. And then from that, I went to Palestine for the first time. And then that was really clear that that also was a settler colonial conflict. And I was able to really connect and understand what that was. So all of that background was, I think, setting me up in part for my activist career. I ended up going to do a master's degree in international peace and conflict resolution, and then worked professionally in the nonprofit space for many years. But I think also sort of setting the stage for a later season in life, which would be the digital nomad journey, because there was a pause in there. After I did my master's degree, I just lived and worked in the United States all the way up until the age of 30. And I was doing nonprofit advocacy work and things of that in an office every day and so forth. And it wasn't until I turned 30, I changed jobs, I moved cities, I unexpectedly got fired from my new job. And then I was like, you know what? I think I need to pivot. And then that's when some of those travel passions started to come back, because I thought, what would be the next phase of my life that I'd like to design?
So what was it about the full-time digital nomad lifestyle in particular that you found so appealing? I mean, as opposed to just a lot of travel from a home base, because you've been a digital nomad for over 10 years now. So there's obviously something about it that you really enjoy. So like, what is that thing? And leading up to that particular transition into this season of your life, was there a moment or an experience that was sort of like, okay, I'm leaving, I just want me and a backpack to travel the world?
So it sort of happened by accident. I didn't exactly plan to just become a digital nomad. That wasn't the plan from the start. I sort of wound up there, and I will give you the backstory. So when I got fired from my job at age 30, I said, okay, I can either apply for another job, or I can take a completely different route and pivot my life entirely and try to start my own business. And I said, you know what? I think I'm going to do that. And then I said, you know what? There's one problem. I have no idea how to start a business. I don't have any background in this. I haven't started a business. I don't have any academic background in that. But you know what? I feel like if I really put in the effort, I could probably learn and figure out how to do that. So I said, I'm going to go to the bookstore and I am going to start reading books on how to start a business. This was 2007. And what I would do each day is I would go into the bookstore and I would just sit there reading books in the business section every day. I didn't have a job, Brittany. I wasn't buying the books. I just sat there reading them. If anybody knows LA, this was Barnes & Noble at the Grove in LA. And I would go in every day and I would read these books. And what I would do first when I would walk in is I would look at the new business book section to see what new business books came out. And one day I walked in and I looked at that section and there was a brand new book that had just come out by some 29-year-old kid that no one had ever heard of by the name of Timothy Ferriss. And it was called The 4-Hour Workweek. And I picked it up and I looked at the back and I said, that's the book I'm reading today. I read that book and that changed my entire perspective on what I was about to do, because what that book taught me was that when you're building a business, don't just build it based on a business plan for the financial revenue, money-making aspect of it. Build it also to create the freedom of mobility for yourself and to build location independence into that, because mobility is a currency of lifestyle design, which is as valuable, if not more valuable, than the money that's required to execute on this lifestyle design. And I said, wow, this is for sure what I'm going to do. And then, of course, I continued reading business books and I realized that I probably don't have most of the skills required to start a business, Brittany, but I knew other people that did. I self-audited and I kind of knew what I was good at and I knew what I was really not good at. And then I knew other people that were good at those things. And so I bought 2 more copies of the 4-Hour Workweek and I mailed them to 2 friends of mine that I was trying to convince to leave their jobs and come start this business with me, because I felt the 3 of us together could do this. It worked. They did. And we have been running a fully remote real estate brokerage called Maverick Investor Group ever since 2007. Now, that does not mean that I was a digital nomad starting in 2007. That just means that I co-founded a fully remote location independent business in 2007. And this here might be an important place to distinguish between location independence and the digital nomad lifestyle. So location independence means I have the choice where to be based because I'm not required to be based in one particular place. I don't have geographical restrictions that are imposed upon me by outside sources. I can choose where I want to be and how I want to design my life. And so I had that freedom once I founded this location independent company. But the way I choose to exercise it for the first 6 years of location independence was to be based in Los Angeles, because I loved LA and I was in a relationship in LA. And my partner and I were living together in LA and things were great. I had no business purpose in LA, but I loved the city. My other 2 business partners were in different cities that they chose to be in because that's where they wanted to be. And my partner was doing her PhD at UCLA in Egyptian history. So both of her parents were from Egypt. She was Egyptian American, born in LA. And we were living together. And one day she came home and she was like, so I got to go to Cairo for a year to do my dissertation research. And I was like, cool, I'm location independent. I'll go to Cairo for a year. Let's do that. And so then we planned on getting rid of all of our stuff in LA, and we started making plans to do that. And we're like, well, if we're getting rid of all of our stuff, we don't need to stay here for the summer. We could go somewhere on the way to Egypt, because pretty much everywhere in the world is cheaper than LA anyways. And we could see another part of the world for 3 months before we arrive in Cairo. So we got rid of all of our stuff and left 3 months early, and we pulled out a world map and we're like, where would we most want to spend 3 months? So we picked Buenos Aires, Argentina, because that's on the way to Egypt from LA, isn't it? Close enough. And so we went to BA for 3 months. And then we went to Cairo for what ended up being about 9 months. We were based there. And at the time planning that, I was only planning to be gone for a year. Like, that was the only thing that was in my mind. I wasn't like, okay, this is the start of 10 years of world travel. No, I was like, okay, we'll go for a year. We'll go to BA. We'll go to Cairo. But then at the end of that year, I was like, you know what? You've got your dissertation research. You've got a year to write this book, your dissertation basically, right? And I can work from anywhere. We don't need to go back to LA. Why don't we just pull out a world map again and this time pick the top 5 places that we would most love to be anywhere in the world and just go rent an Airbnb for like 2 months or so in each place. So we were like Rio de Janeiro, Cape Town, South Africa, Barcelona, and we just went around the world. And that ended up being a 2-year itinerant nomadic journey where we were staying places for 1 to 2 months. And we did that for 2 years. So add into that the Egypt and the Buenos Aires legs of that trip. And so we ended up nomading around the world for a total of 3 years together as a couple. And then we ended up breaking up in 2016. So it had been a 7-year relationship at that point. And we ended up breaking up on the island of Cyprus in the Mediterranean Sea, Brittany. When we broke up, I all of a sudden realized I don't know a single person on the island of Cyprus. I've literally just gotten out of a 7-year relationship. I need hugs. I need support. And I don't have one single person here that I can get that from. So then I was like, okay, what do I do? I'm in this massive life transitionary moment, just got out of a 7-year relationship. I'm like, okay, what do I do? So I was like, okay, step 1, get off the island of Cyprus. So I go to the Skyscanner website, which is a travel booking website. But one of the cool features that Skyscanner has, if people haven't used it, is you put in your departure airport. So I was leaving from Nicosia, Cyprus. But your destination airport, it allows you to put everywhere. And then what it will do is it will list out what other countries you can fly to in order of least expensive. So I'm like, from Nicosia, Cyprus, going anywhere, least expensive flight, turned out to be Athens, Greece. I was like, book it. I'm going to the airport tonight, get on a plane, land in Athens, Greece, check into an Airbnb, and then get up the next morning. I'm like, okay, step 2. Plan rest of life. So I went to a coffee shop, pulled out the laptop, and I was like, okay. And I had remembered at that point, so this was 2016, and I remember that someone had told me about this company called Remote Year. And this was a company that was still in their very first year of operations at the point. They had launched in 2015. And this is a company that designs 12-month-long itineraries for remote professionals. And so you go and it's a whole bunch of people that can work remotely full-time, but nobody knows each other to start. You're all coming together to form an intentional community. And then Remote Year, the company, sets up all of your accommodations, your co-working space access, things to do on the ground in a different city every month for 12 months across 4 continents, and you travel the world for the whole year with the same community. So you're moving together as a community, living in a different place around the world, experiencing the world together for a year. And I was like, this is perfect because nobody knows anybody, and we're all coming together to form a community and to form friendships, and it allows me to continue traveling. I was like, this is perfect. So I did Remote Year for a year, and then I just kept on going from there. So that's how I got into the digital nomad lifestyle.
So while you're in Athens, Greece, heartbroken, trying to figure out what to do next, was there ever a moment where you considered not traveling, where you considered going back to the US, maybe even back to LA or where your parents are or whatever, and just like calling it quits on travel?
If it wasn't for Remote Year, that was a very high possibility because my top priority at the time was I needed community urgently. One of the things that I think that I neglected while I was traveling the world with my partner, which was an amazing 3 years, one of the things that I think I neglected was the building of social community. Because we had each other, we were there, we're like doing a whole bunch of work during the day, and then we just go out to dinner together. We'd go do this thing on the weekend together. And I really felt incredibly isolated when I broke up with her because I was like, whoa, I don't really have a community. So yeah, I was like, that's my top priority. And maybe I'll have to move to a city and build a community and connect with people that way. Because historically, traditionally, like that's how you would do it, right? But then remote year just happened at the exact right time. And that created the opportunity for me to have both a community and keep traveling. And that is what really allowed me to do it at the time.
Yeah. So I'm all about intentional travel. And for me, my biggest intention with travel is for self-development, self-reliance, self-confidence, really getting to know yourself on a deep, authentic level in a way that I think only solo travel can do for a person. So I'm curious about what your main intentions are with travel. Is it community? Is it your passion for the humanitarian and activism type of work that you do?
I think there's a lot of things that I'm really passionate about when it comes to travel. One of them is just seeing and experiencing really different parts of the world that are very different from where I grew up or the culture that I came from. And you just learn so much about how other people live in these different cultures and see different architecture and you eat different food. And it's just like this amazing learning experience, which just blows my mind every single time. Even more than a decade into this lifestyle, I'm just still so enamored and interested and impressed with all of these different things around the world. And then when you get to connect with people in those places, that is incredibly special to me, being able to connect with local people and just how kind human beings have been to me all over the world in all of these different places. And this is one of the things that gives me so much faith in humanity, shall we say, is just the kindness of people who oftentimes don't even speak my language and I don't speak theirs. And yet they're willing to go way out of their way to help me and be nice to me and be supportive of me and welcome me into their country and things like that. And so I always just have heartwarming experiences with local people in all of these places that are total strangers. They don't know me, and yet they're so over the top kind to me. And so that's amazing for me. And then there is the meeting of other travelers, which I host the Maverick Show podcast. Then I interview other travelers every single week on that show who I think are some of the most fascinating people in the world. And they're from all different countries. They're from different places and different cultures. And they also have been to a lot of different places and different cultures. And those two things overlaid has produced really interesting reflections for them and experiences for them and insights from them that I'm curious about learning, because that might be different from my experience because I'm from a different place or something, right? In terms of like, how was my experience there? So I'm super interested in those different travel lenses and connecting with different travelers to hear their experiences and their reflections on things. And I learn from the travelers as well as from local folks when I go places. And then of course there's the personal growth stuff as well, right? Which is going to places oftentimes that are a little bit beyond our comfort level and intentionally putting ourselves in situations where it's very different and we have to sort of figure it out in places where we are not familiar and maybe it's different languages, maybe it's really different cultural dynamics, maybe it's whatever it is. But putting ourselves in those places, I think, creates an opportunity for personal growth at a much more rapid pace than just staying in our super comfortable, familiar surroundings. And so I think there's that, but that I think overlays with the learning. What else are we learning here? So let's also take this as an opportunity, even in the personal growth category, to learn about the history of this place, right? And then let's learn, particularly if we're, let's say, like me, coming from the U.S. as an American citizen, let me also learn about American foreign policy history in this place, right? And what impact that may have had on this place that I'm stepping into, and why that's important for me to be aware of that. So now all of a sudden I'm learning about the world, and I'm learning about history. I'm learning about my government's role in that history, which is oftentimes a really problematic history, which is really important, I think, for Americans to contend with in terms of things that the United States has done all over the world, right? Whether we're talking about overthrowing democracies and installing dictatorships in South America, or we're talking about the crimes that the U.S. government committed in Southeast Asia and the war against Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos, or dropping the atomic bomb on Japan, or doing any number of these things, and then going to these places and really understanding that history. I mean, like, these are the types of things I think also that travel allows us to do and learn about, and then grow as human beings with that deeper understanding of the history, and then allowing us to position ourselves today contemporarily in a place where we can be in solidarity with oppressed or vulnerable groups.
Do you feel like your travels sparked your undeniable passion for activism and that sort of thing, or the opposite? And thinking back to like your childhood, were you always just a lover of your fellow humans and super curious and open-minded in that way? You know, did your parents, what was their influence on how you perceive people and the world around you, and navigate the world in such a way? Because I mean, obviously I'll link to your show in the show notes, but one thing that I love about the Maverick Show is how well you handle really delicate, upsetting topics that should be talked about. You shine a light on things that people don't think about enough, and you have such a great perspective. So I'm just curious how you got there.
I appreciate that feedback on the Maverick Show, Brittany. Thank you very much for saying that. I think when I think back, you know, I grew up in a mostly white suburb. We moved around to a couple of different places, but I went to middle school and high school in Buffalo, New York. And when I say Buffalo, New York, I don't actually mean Buffalo, New York. I mean a nearly all white suburb of Buffalo, New York. And so it was, I think, really privileged and really culturally insular in many ways, and pretty secluded in terms of the types of views that we were exposed to, even in school, what we were taught and not taught, and so forth. And I will say, I will credit hip hop music, political conscious hip hop music, for raising a lot of my initial consciousness, right? So for me, my high school was the early to mid 90s. When I started getting a hold of hip hop music from Public Enemy and groups like that, and I started listening to what they were saying, and then that started me asking questions like, why am I not learning about this in school? What are these guys talking about? Why are these people they're referencing? I've never heard of them, right? And I loved hip hop. I mean, I just completely fell in love with hip hop music. And then I wanted to become a hip hop DJ, which I did in high school and college, and sort of parlayed that into like a mobile DJ business back then. So that was a big part of my life. But the hip hop and the political conscious lyrics in specific hip hop really got me asking questions. And so I would say that my very first interest in really trying to understand histories of oppression was with the African American experience in the United States, and starting to look at that history, and started to look at the resistance at different phases in the African American experience in the United States, and the different challenges to white supremacy and other intersecting power dynamics. And I started really looking into that. And then when I got to college, as I mentioned to you, my advisor in college was Native American. So then I took his Native Nations class, and then I started learning about that whole history. And then I went to Ireland, and I'm Irish American, but I'm 3 generations in the United States or so. And so a lot of that Irish decolonial history gets stripped away, the sort of this quote unquote becoming white process in the United States, right? But when you go back to Ireland, if you go to particularly the occupied 6 counties in the north of Ireland, you will find some of the most robust solidarity with other decolonial struggles like Palestine anywhere in the world. I mean, that's quite a disjuncture from what you might see growing up in the United States, right? So that was really interesting. And I started going into that. And then, as I mentioned, I went to Palestine and I actually went to the West Bank and I went to the Gaza Strip and I went to the refugee camps and I went to the settlements and I saw that stuff. And I talked to people and I saw the whole Israeli apartheid apparatus and what that looks like, right? What the Israeli occupation infrastructure actually looks like. And once you see that stuff, it just becomes really clear. And then you realize, oh, and also my government is the one that is funding and backing and arming and politically enabling this whole thing. The United States is the primary funder and supporter, and it's basically the colonial metropolis of the state of Israel, right? And so then I start realizing, oh, this is really important for me to understand my responsibility, because I'm a taxpayer and I vote in the United States, but B, my unique level of influence, because I pay taxes and vote in the United States, compared with people elsewhere around the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And my ability to actually influence this in a positive way from a human rights perspective. And so then I started doing organizing around that. And so I think a lot of that came about in part. There was a travel component of it. I went to the north of Ireland. I saw those things there. I reconnected with my Irish heritage and particularly the decolonial history of my Irish heritage and the present day decolonial solidarity of Irish people, right? And also I went to Palestine and I saw that. So some of that had to do with travel, but a lot of that travel though, and the choices of things that I was looking into were because I was motivated to try to learn about those things so that I could be in solidarity and be on the right side of struggles against oppression, because I wanted to learn about those things. I think it's very possible for people to travel the world and pay no attention to those things if they have the privilege to avoid them and just go to resorts and go eat at restaurants and go out to nightclubs and don't read any of the history and don't pay attention to contemporary situations of marginalized group experiences in those countries and just ignore all of that. If you have the privilege to do that, I think it's very possible. So I don't think that travel alone is like this awakening thing that's going to make you a humane person and conscious about the world. But I think that it is an extraordinary way to learn about those things if you choose to pay attention to those things.
Yeah, I totally agree. And to sort of segue into some questions I have about the Maverick Show, I also just feel like you are such a good interviewer. So I'm curious if that's always been a way that you would describe yourself. I mean, you have almost 300 episodes. So is it a skill that you've honed over time? Do you spend a lot of time trying to like perfect your craft? Or do you feel like you've always just had a way with words? Because again, you're an excellent interviewer, but also just sort of a wordsmith and a storyteller.
Thank you for that feedback again, Brittany. I appreciate it. I think that the interviewing is a craft for sure. And I think like any other craft, the more you do it, the better you get at it. Part of it also has to do with how much effort you put into it, like any other craft. How much background research I do on my guests oftentimes has them saying, wow, no one's ever done that much background research on me. And so part of it has to do with how much preparation am I doing for the interview so that I know what questions to ask. And I am interviewing people on my show that I am fascinated with, I am impressed with, and I am genuinely interested in learning from. And if those three pieces are in place, where you're fascinated with this person, you're impressed with this person, and you're genuinely interested in learning from them, then that's going to inspire you to prepare for the interview in such a way that you're going to be able to ask questions that are going to, number one, draw out really interesting stories. If these people have had really unique experiences, I want them to tell those stories, right? If these people have done things that are really impressive, I want to deconstruct how they did that and draw value for the audience from that, right? So, for example, I will interview people that are remote entrepreneurs that have built businesses in spaces that are not at all traditionally virtual. I interviewed Jen McGee, for example, who owns an architecture design company, and she has Fortune 500 clients, Sharper Image and Barnes & Noble and these types of clients. She won an award for designing the duty-free shops at JFK Airport. And she was on my remote year program, traveling the world full-time with me for 12 consecutive months all over the world, running her business. And I'm like, how are you doing that? And so I'm like, you know what? Let's turn on the microphones, open a bottle of wine, and have you tell me exactly how you built that company and how you're running it completely remotely. Or I was in Kenya for a month in Nairobi, and I met Daraja Asili, who I've interviewed on the Maverick Show, and I'm talking with her, and she's a remote business owner. I said, what kind of business do you run? She runs a live events business. All of the live events take place in the United States. She gets over 100,000 paying customers per year that attend her live events. And here she is with me just hanging out in Kenya for a month running this business. I was like, how are you running that business? And I'm like, wait a minute, let's turn the microphones on and do an episode on this. And so this is kind of how the Maverick Show was born, is I would just run into these fascinating people that had incredible travel stories to tell. And then they had done these remarkable things that I genuinely wanted to understand how the heck they did that, but then also deliver that value to people, right? So that the listeners could be inspired or intrigued or learn something by the travel stories. They can certainly learn something by deconstructing some of these business models and how people went from a traditional corporate 9-to-5 job into this digital nomad lifestyle, especially if it's using a really non-traditional business model in order to do that. I think all of those things correlate and relate to my guest selection. And because I'm so interested in these guests, that inspires my guest preparation so that I know what I'm going to pull out. And I know it's going to be fascinating for both me and the audience. And then there is the conversational dynamic, right? So once I kind of know what types of questions I'm going to ask you, where I'm going to go with the interview, then there's really just creating a comfort level, creating a rapport. Like, so for example, you and I before this interview, hopefully people that are listening to this feel like we're super comfortable together, right? I mean, we're like legitimate good friends, and it sounds like that. And we're just chatting about stuff. And you and I have hung out in the past in person. We've had coffee together, we've chatted. And so being able to build a comfort level and a rapport so that you feel like you're talking to your friend that you've known for quite a while, and the audience kind of is able to just listen in on that conversation, I think is also part of it. Sometimes you can actually go out for coffee with each other like you and I have. Other times you don't have that option because it's virtual, but there's other ways that you can have maybe a pre-interview conversation or otherwise create a high level of comfort and rapport so that it just sounds like a casual, laid-back conversation.
Well, I'm going to take your advice and segue right into your non-traditional, fully remote real estate brokerage. So let's just get into everything that the Maverick Group does and offers and how you and your team have been able to create this, again, non-traditional, fully remote business.
Yeah, so Maverick Investor Group is a real estate brokerage based in the United States, but it is not a traditional real estate brokerage. We have a niche specialty, which has been the exact same niche specialty since 2007, which is that we help people to buy turnkey rental properties as an investment from anywhere in the world. All of these properties are in the US. They're in markets that we consider to be investor advantaged U.S. real estate markets. And so you can own in the best U.S. real estate markets without having to live near the property, right? So that's the value proposition. And it's a turnkey value proposition, which means that these are mostly single family homes, sometimes 2 to 4 unit properties, but they're all residential, right? No commercial real estate, all residential. And these single family homes come fully renovated with long-term tenants in place on a lease and a local professional property management company already in place that is collecting the rent every month, handling any maintenance calls, dealing with the tenant, all of that stuff, so that you can own these properties from anywhere without having to be the rehabber or the landlord or live near the property. So that is the value proposition. And that means that some of our clients, for example, are people that live in really expensive real estate markets where it's not advantageous to buy rental properties. So our clients live in San Francisco or Manhattan or something like that. And they realize that they can buy 10 houses for the price of one if they were to reallocate their real estate investments to markets like Indianapolis and St. Louis and Kansas City and Cleveland and those type of markets. And in addition to being able to buy more houses, they're able to get a lot more rental income for the total real estate investment than if they had deployed that in these really expensive markets. So some of our clients just want to invest in more advantageous markets, and they live in the US outside of those markets, and they want to buy out-of-state properties, and they're able to buy out-of-state properties with our model because they're fully renovated, tenants are in place, and property management's in place. So they don't even need to fly into the market to see or close on the property. They can just buy it sight unseen from out of state, which is what most of our clients do. And as you've probably gathered, this model also lends itself really well to digital nomads, right? So we have a whole bunch of digital nomad clients that want to own U.S. rental properties as an investment, but they want to be traveling the world, doing their thing, living their best life. But as their businesses make money or their remote job makes them money, they want to be able to invest that into rental properties. And so we facilitate their ability to do that. And we serve a lot of digital nomads. And so that is how the business model works. And then if you want, I can go into the other side of it, which is how did we as the business owners build that business model?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I think in general, when you're trying to build a business model in a space that is not traditionally virtual, but you want to build a remote business, and a real estate brokerage is certainly not a traditionally virtual business model, you need to itemize out all of the perceived obstacles, challenges, and geographic restrictions. A traditional real estate brokerage, you think of real estate agents that are driving people around to houses to look at those houses so they can buy a house to live in it. Or you think of real estate agents trying to sell a house, so they're sitting in the house, hosting an open house and allowing other people come in that might want to buy it. That's what people think about as a traditional brokerage. Neither of those things could be done if you're traveling around the world, right? And so we don't do either of those things. Never once in our entire history since 2007 have we ever helped someone to buy a house to live in, or have we helped someone to sell a house that they're trying to sell on the traditional retail market. So we don't do either of those things. The only thing that we do is help people to buy turnkey real estate investment properties in markets where they don't live. That's how we got out of some of those traditional obligations. Now, let's talk about the turnkey real estate stuff. Well, there's still a whole bunch of geographically restrictive stuff associated with that. Somebody's got to buy these houses. Somebody's got to oversee the renovations and the construction that's being done on these houses. Somebody's got to be on the ground to manage the property and, send maintenance people over when the tenant has a problem. Someone has to do that, and that's obviously a local job that you have to be on the ground to do. Okay, so you list those things out. And then what you do when you're building your remote business model is you say, okay, my company, the role that we are going to play specifically is not going to include those geographically restrictive tasks being delivered by our staff. Rather, we are going to partner with, build business relationships with separate companies that are on the ground that do this professionally. So a local professional property management company, they are professional property managers. They do this locally in that market all day, every day. That is what they do. We will build a relationship with them to manage the property. Separate companies that are on the ground, and what they do all day, every day is they acquire properties, they renovate those properties, they run their own construction crews, they're able to do all this stuff. We will build a relationship with those companies in terms of sourcing properties to our clients. Our company, the things that we are actually delivering on is we are doing market research. We're identifying which are the most advantageous real estate markets to be in. We are building all of those relationships and making sure that all of those vendors are delivering properties that are advantageous to real estate investors. And then we are building relationships with the real estate investor buyers, our clients, right? We're doing video consultations with them. We're understanding what are their needs. What are the real estate investing goals? Where are they right now financially on their journey? What are their investment goals? Where would they like to be 5 years from now? And how can we help to get them on a path to start buying rental properties, to start building a rental property portfolio over time? And we work with those buyers. How can we support them in that? Well, we can also introduce them to other vendors like preferred lenders that can qualify for them for financing. And they specialize in doing mortgages on turnkey rental properties. So we can get them qualified at no cost to them. Maybe they want to start an LLC to hold their property in after they buy it. Well, we have relationships with asset protection companies that start those entities for people. We can introduce them there. We can support them through their whole process of independently doing their due diligence and hiring their own home inspector to inspect the property and hiring their appraiser and, all the things that they're going to do. That when they are doing this independently, we can walk them through it and help to direct them to the resources, to the vendors, and walk them through the whole process so they feel totally supported, they feel totally educated, they feel totally empowered, but they don't have to be there themselves to do it. And we, as Maverick Investor Group, also don't have to be on the ground in these places either.
So why real estate? How was that inspired?
So when I was working in the nonprofit advocacy space, which I told you was my entire professional work experience all the way up until the age of 30, I realized that on a nonprofit salary, I was never going to make a lot of money as a salary in my job, which was fine because I was doing really important work that I really cared about. I was just amazed that someone was paying me enough money to live off of, because this is the volunteer activist work I'd be doing on the side when I got home anyways. And now all of a sudden I could do this for a job. Like, that was amazing. It was blissful. It was incredible. But I realized that this was never going to be super financially lucrative. So I should probably learn about investing. And so what I did while I was working at my job is I decided to buy a house, but I bought a 4-bedroom house and I rented out 3 bedrooms to friends of mine. So we had a group house and I had 3 streams of income that were helping to cover the mortgage, right? And then what happened is the very first year after I bought that house, it appreciated in value more than my entire annual salary at my job. And I was like, wait a minute, hold on a minute. Are you telling me that I could have just sat on my couch the whole year and made more money than going in and working 40 plus hour a week every week for a year? That's interesting. And so then I did a cash out refinance, and then I started reading every book I could read about real estate investing, and I started buying rental properties in other markets. And then my friends approached me and they were like, dude, how are you buying these rental properties? Like, we are interested in that. Can you help us to buy rental properties too? Like, just show us what you're doing so that we can buy rental properties also. I was like, sure, here's what I'm doing. And so then I was starting to help my friends to buy rental properties. And then what I realized is that the real estate brokers that were helping us to identify these properties and buy these properties, they were getting paid a commission for all the properties we were closing on, but we weren't paying it, because in the US, the seller pays 100% of the real estate brokerage fees and the buyer pays nothing. And I was like, well, that's cool. Like, they're providing value to us and they're getting compensated for it, but we're not paying them. That's kind of cool. So then once I get fired from my job and I'm trying to figure out how to start a business, I'm thinking about what business could I start? And I thought, well, I already have people that are already coming to me to help them to buy rental properties. If I could just get a real estate brokerage license and start a real estate brokerage business, I could literally just continue helping my friends to buy rental properties, continue charging them nothing, and all of a sudden start making money and having a business. I was like, that's crazy. That's the craziest business model I've ever seen, because I don't like selling stuff. I particularly don't like selling stuff to my friends. But if I can literally just keep helping to buy rental properties, charge them nothing, and all of a sudden have a business and make money, that's for me. And so then that's how it started. And then we've just been building it, and it's been going ever since then.
Do you have any competitors, or are you the only person doing it like this?
I mean, there's different people and different companies that do all sorts of
Something
variations
similar,
on any kind of rental property thing, or I mean, there's all sorts of variations of companies that do different types of things. You know, one of the reasons we've been able to do this for so long, since 2007, is that we have been able to work with our same clients over time. A lot of the real estate brokerages are very transactional. Because in traditional brokerages, that's what it is. You're going to buy a house to live in. Once you find the house to live in, you buy it. Like, that's it. There's no more business. And so traditionally, they're very transactional, whereas we are very focused on continuing to help people to build their portfolios of rental properties over time. So a lot of our clients have been buying their properties through us for over 10 years and buying in different real estate markets and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think that's one thing, is that we're very focused on long-term client relationships. The other thing is that we have been also, we're certainly the only digital nomad run company that I know of. And that has allowed a lot of affinity marketing, if you will, or positioning within the digital nomad community. Because if you're a digital nomad and you want to buy US rental properties, I mean, any real estate agent will tell you, yeah, I can help you buy a rental property in the US, but wouldn't you rather buy it through a company that's run by digital nomads like you that understand the lifestyle and also specifically designed the business model for you so that you could travel around the world and still own these turnkey rental properties, right? So I think we've had a lot of unique positioning within some of those communities. And I've been invited to speak at a lot of these digital nomad conferences around the world about how to do this stuff.
Yeah. So I want to circle back a little bit to more of the travel stuff and get your advice on how a person can curate a travel experience similar to what your sort of intentions are when you travel, which is this really local, unique, on the ground, connecting with people and understanding the history and that sort of thing. How can someone curate that type of experience in travel? And then what sort of resources do you use in planning travel, but also in just staying current in world news? How are you ensuring that all of the information you get about the entire world is legitimate and not propaganda?
All right, so let's take the first part of that question first, which is about how to structure travel experiences and how to sort of get immersive local experiences. You know, one of the things that I will say is that if you are traveling around the world and you are plugging into digital nomad communities, let's just say, because there's a lot of those that are virtually available. A lot of folks are from different places. So a lot of times what will happen is I will meet travelers somewhere. And in that place, we're both travelers. We're not from there, right? But they're from somewhere else, okay? And when you stay connected with those people, then when you go to their country, if they're there at the time, boy, can you have a special local experience. So I recently interviewed a very good Kenyan digital nomad friend of mine, Eva Adongo, when I was in her home city of Nairobi, Kenya. She's traveled to over 100 countries on a Kenyan passport and has unbelievable stories. I mean, she's more well-traveled than I am, but she and I have hung out in different places around the world. She's a very dear friend of mine. So it was really fun to interview her in her home city. And the first time I went to Kenya, which was 2018, a Ugandan friend of mine that I also know from nomading was in Kampala in Uganda. And she was like, dude, if you are in Nairobi, you got to come to Kampala. It's super close. You can stay at my place. I'll take you around and I'll show you Uganda. I was like, done. And so I went to Uganda and I only went for 4 nights, but it was one of the most unbelievable 4 nights of travel I have ever had. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. So she's taking me out to the nightclubs till 6 in the morning. And I am the only non-Ugandan person in any of these clubs, you know. I mean, she's taking me around. We're doing the local transportation on the matatus, which are like these shared vans, which are like packed in with 12 people. And some dude's got a couple chickens he's bringing into the van. I mean, like really local stuff, you know. And I'm rolling with her and it was just amazing. But I met her outside of Uganda, traveling somewhere else. And then I knew her when I went there. Or another friend of mine I saw in Kenya, who is also a Kenyan nomad, is Agnes Nyamwange, who is a dear friend of mine who I also met outside of Kenya. And Agnes and I traveled together really extensively because she's a nomad, right? So when you know other nomads that just travel around the world with no base, you can just hit them up and be like, hey, want to go travel to West Africa for 3 months with me? So I hit Agnes up and she's like, yeah, because she's from East Africa. You know, she was born and raised in Kenya, went to college in Uganda, but she had never been to West Africa. So I was like, want to just roll to West Africa with me? She's like, yeah. So we went to Nigeria for a month, we went to Ghana for a month, went to Senegal for a month, went to the Ivory Coast for a short trip. And there we were connecting with local folks through different mechanisms or different networks that we had. So for example, in Ghana, we connected with a Ghanaian friend of mine who I actually knew from the remote year program. So he had, born and raised in Accra in Ghana. He had ended up coming over to the U.S. and then he had to actually leave the U.S. because of visa issues, which actually propelled him onto the remote year program. He was not on my program. He was on the program before mine. Okay. But when he finished, we finished in the same city, which was in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He finished a month before my group and he stayed on for another month. So he basically joined my group for the final month. And we literally met in a salsa class in Buenos Aires. And I'm talking to him. He's like, oh yeah, I'm from Ghana, stuff. So when I went to Ghana for my first time in 2019 for a month, I said, bro, like, are you here? He's like, oh yeah, I'm here. Like, let's hang out. And so he brought all his friends. So we were rolling however many deep in Ghana with local Ghanaian folks because I had that type of a connection. Or even in Lagos, Nigeria, we rented an Airbnb. I'm just trying to give you different examples of this, right? We rented an Airbnb from local folks, local Nigerian folks had an Airbnb. And we were in touch with them pretty regularly about stuff. And then they ended up, the local Nigerian owners of this Airbnb ended up taking us out with a bunch of their friends for like a club hopping night in Lagos. So we were probably 3 weeks into that trip. We were rolling like 13 deep in Lagos. And so if you make an effort, one is connecting with travelers and then going to their homelands when they're there. But also I think just when you're in a place, making an effort to meet local people, but also just, I think, have a local experience. Like even if you're not going out with a local person, figuring out how to go to local places. So I'll give you an example. I'll stay on the Nigeria example. Nigeria is a place that has a lot less tourism than other places. And so when you look at stuff online or things like that, there's less stuff online than there is in other spots. And so we started asking local people, where do you recommend that we should go to a nightclub? And so the responses that we started getting was, you should probably go to this nightclub. I think you would like it. And they're making a genuine recommendation, what they think that I would like, because that was the question that I asked them, where do you think that I should go? And so then we would get there and it would be not what we were looking for. I mean, it's just kind of like a bougie bottle service. Some other white expats are there or whatever. And it's just like, this is really not why we came to Nigeria. We came for really local club scene, Afro beats, you know, like this kind of stuff. So what we started doing, I was there with my friend Agnes, right? My Kenyan friend. And what Agnes and I started doing is we started asking a different question. We started asking the Uber drivers, where do you go out to a nightclub when you go out? And they're like, well, I certainly don't go around here. And we're like, okay, drive us to the place where you go when you go out. And he's like, really? We're like, yep. And so then we started and then we found exactly what we were looking for, right? So I think a lot of those types of techniques, you know, you can use as well.
Yeah, I agree. I've definitely done that with restaurants and stuff and found some amazing little spots that you would never be able to come up with on Google or through a blog from, like you said, a white expat from the US. You just can't. The other question is, how are you staying current on world news and ensuring that the information you're getting is the information that you should believe and should care about?
Okay, so I think number one is paying attention to some independent media sources. So, for example, in the United States, we have Democracy Now!, which is an independent media source, which I would highly recommend everybody check out. I think that you can also pay attention to international media sources that are outside of the United States. So Al Jazeera, sources like that. And then I think you can also have direct information. So for example, with regard to the genocide in Palestine, you can actually follow Palestinians on the ground in Gaza who are literally live streaming this stuff and putting it out directly, no filter, on social media. And so you can actually follow direct journalists that are on the ground in these types of places if you're looking to get news from these types of places. And so I think following local journalists and people in these places is good. And then also following independent media is also really good.
If there are any listeners who want to be more involved or more active in those goings on, where do you recommend they start?
Active in what sense?
I guess just more conscious as they travel, and if there are any local activism events that they can get involved in. That could be any number of things. And maybe you just named it. It's following those content creators that are kind of on the ground. But if there are any other recommendations you have for someone who wants to be more involved, but just doesn't know where to go.
So I think there's probably a couple different categories we could talk about, right? One is just sort of generally making a proactive decision to try to read about the history of the places where you're going. So there's a lot of digital nomads go to Colombia, let's say, right? A lot of digital nomads from the United States go to Colombia. How familiar with the history of the United States foreign policy role in backing right-wing death squads and paramilitary groups in Colombia are people that are going there? That's probably an important piece of the history that you could look into, right? And when we have all this technology now, you could literally just do a really straightforward abbreviated thing, start asking ChatGPT about some of this history and have them put you onto some stuff. Or you could start looking for books and looking for things and going more in depth into it, but just sort of being aware. Why are things the way that they are today? What impact has the history of the last, just say the last 25 years, like recent history? It doesn't even necessarily have to go back very far, right? The early 2000s, Colombia was the third largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid, and it was for a very, very right-wing regime that was committing really extreme human rights violations in Colombia against the Colombian people. And so it's important to understand that history and how did that piece of history shape what's happening in Colombia today, right? And so forth. What are some of the politics today, right? I mean, are people aware that Colombia recently just elected a left-wing government for the first time with the first ever Black female vice president in Colombian history who is now in office? And what is this government now doing? And how is this government standing in solidarity with the Palestinians against the genocide that Israel and the United States are committing? So all of a sudden now you're like, wow, there's this whole bigger picture there that I'm starting to see about how are some of these things connected and how is history related to what's happening now. And region of the world is connected with this region of the world. And there's these solidarity ties. And all of a sudden, a much bigger picture starts getting created. And so I think it really just starts with making a choice that you're going to be interested in the people and the places that you are going. And you want to read about that history. And then also to pay attention to the groups that are marginalized in the places where you're going. So, for example, South Africa is a really, I think, important example of a place where there's a lot of different intersectional marginalization dynamics that are happening. So most people, hopefully, are aware that South Africa has this whole colonial history of apartheid, which was this white supremacist colonial regime, which fell. The apartheid regime fell, but there's still a lot of overarching dynamics of white supremacy and wealth inequality and things like that, which are pretty visible to anyone that looks around. But you're also developing there now, contemporarily, and for many years there have been dynamics where there is a pretty intense level of xenophobia, including vigilante violence, against Black immigrants from other African countries that are in South Africa. And so now you have a lot of these different dynamics trying to be interested in understanding those. And when you're getting an Uber in Cape Town, there's probably over a 90% chance that your driver is going to be an immigrant from another African country outside of South Africa. And so just literally opening up the conversation and saying, oh, what's up, man? Where are you from? And so, oh, I'm from fill in the blank where. I'm from Zimbabwe. Oh, cool. And then you start talking to them about that and then asking them about their lived experience and just letting them know that you're interested in listening, in learning, and that you're supportive of them. And most of them are more than happy to talk about what their experience has been in South Africa as an immigrant from Zimbabwe. And then you as the traveler are able to, one, hopefully boost this person's day by saying they know that you're aware that immigrants have been having a hard time. They know that you're interested in that. And they know that you're willing to listen to their experience and that you were interested in their experience. And that alone can be uplifting for like a human being, but also for you as a traveler can be incredibly educational so that you understand what some of these dynamics are that are going on. And then, of course, if you're from a country that has some pretty profound anti-immigrant rhetoric going on, you can be like, whoa, the anti-immigrant rhetoric sounds really similar to anti-immigrant rhetoric I've heard before about entirely different groups and so on and so forth. And you're able to make some of these global connections.
That's a lot to think about. And I agree that it's really the responsibility, I think, of a traveler, to your point, to learn the history of where you're going. And I think that, as a queer traveler, I sort of have to make sure that I'll be safe, even though I'm very straight presenting, and that's a whole separate conversation. But still, my partner and I have to do a certain level of research every time we travel to make sure we're safe to hold hands or not call ourselves friends for the sake of safety. And I think that a lot of travelers have the privilege of not needing to do as much of that prep research because they're just gonna be safe, probably regardless. So there's not the same pressure to do that research ahead of time. So then you don't get into the history of the political climate and all of that. So yeah, I think it's interesting that people have such different experiences all over the world. And in order to be a conscious traveler, to your point, I agree that you have the responsibility of putting in that extra effort and learning about the people and then showing them, the locals, that you care and that you are a conscious traveler is important.
Totally agree.
You are so busy and have so much going on, with the added layer of a sort of inconsistent, dynamic environment. How do you stay organized? And what's your system or process for time management and productivity and just organization?
I don't know if I have a great answer to this question, Brittany. I feel like in the nomad life, there is a balance between routine and stability anchors. Let's call all of that in one category, versus the changing dynamics that we want to put into our life, because those are inspiring and invigorating because of the change. And this, I think, is a balance that different people strike in different ways. And I ask these types of questions to people too. If you're moving around, what types of stability anchors do you use? That's an interesting one. And I've had some people say, well, every place that I land, it's a brand new place. I've never been there. I go immediately to the grocery store and I at least buy a dozen eggs so that I can have eggs in the morning when I wake up. And I buy a bottle of wine so that I can have a glass of wine before I go to sleep my first night in a place. And as long as I can have a glass of red wine before I go to sleep in a new country and I have eggs when I wake up in the morning, then I feel like there's a level of stability there. And that takes me from place to place. And other people are like, oh, I bring this thing with me. I think one is just sort of being able to create a sense of home and comfort in a really different place that you've never been before for yourself, and just thinking through what might some of those things be, either that you can bring with you or that you can then go get as soon as you arrive, and that you can have a level of comfort. And then I think it's about thinking for you personally, and the recipe for this may be different for everybody in terms of how do you normally work and how do you normally organize your life and how do you normally do these things, but thinking about some pillars. So for example, exercise and fitness. As we're moving around, sometimes, especially, you get in these stretches of the nomad life where there's all this really exciting and fun stuff going on. And then, I'll be like, holy cow, I did not exercise for the last month and I feel terrible and I've gained weight and I'm, like, what's going on here, And so you just kind of, I think, need to pay attention to some of these things where you're setting up, okay, this is how I'm going to get my fitness in this country. Maybe I'll join a gym because I'm going to be here for a month or 2 or 3. Or maybe this is a type of place where I'm just going to jog outside each day. Maybe I live on the beach and I want to just run on the sand each morning, and that's a thing and it's lovely. And there's a huge psychological benefit, I think, to being near waves and ocean. And I try to do that for a minimum of a month out of the year, to be like on a beach somewhere, and then to be able to exercise and jog through the waves. And that's a nice thing for that month. And maybe I would much rather do that than join a gym, especially if it's in a place like Brazil where you also have like outdoor fitness equipment that's for free that you can use. It's right on the beach. And now all of a sudden you have all of that in addition to being able to go jogging and stuff, right? Whereas other places, it might be like really difficult to exercise outside. And so you really want to join the gym for that month. So I think setting up some of those things and then scheduling your life around that, and then giving some variation depending upon what is happening and what your priorities are going to be there, right? And what you want to do. And maybe there's like really cool stuff to do at a particular time of day. And so you want to go and do that cool stuff. When I was in Dakar in Senegal, I wanted to prioritize the sunset on the beach every night. I mean, they would have these surfers who would all come out at kind of like right around the sunset period. And there was like this huge popular time for surfing. So I'm watching all these Senegalese surfers, and you're just ordering a cocktail and watching the sun set over the ocean. And now I was like, this is unbelievable. And I wanted to just prioritize doing that every single night. So I would just have like my work flow in the day, and then I would go and I would prioritize that. And then maybe I'd come back and do more work in the evening, and then maybe go out later after that or whatever. Whereas other places, some places have later night schedules. So for example, if you're in Spain or Italy, or I'll tell you the latest night place I've ever been is Argentina. I mean, Buenos Aires is crazy. Like if you try to go out for dinner at 8 p.m. in Buenos Aires, there will not be a restaurant that is open. The doors to restaurants open at 9 p.m. Nobody is really going to be there until about 10, and the prime dinner hour is going to be about 10:30 p.m. or 11. And so people eat dinner from about 11 till 1, and then they go out to the bars, and this is every night, this isn't just the weekend. And then they go out to the bars from 1 till 3, and then they go to the club from 3 till 7. And then this is the cycle. So if you're in a place like that versus if you're in the opposite type of place where everybody goes to sleep super early and then gets up and does morning activities, and maybe if you're a surfer or you're an early morning yogi or you're a kite surfer or you're whatever it is that you do that you like to do early in the morning, and it's more of an early morning kind of like vibe and culture in the particular place that you are, maybe you're on a totally different type of cycle.
Before we wrap up, is there anything that we haven't covered yet?
I think we have covered a lot, and I think these conversations can continue. For me, it's an ongoing learning process, and I learn both through traveling and talking to local folks, but also through talking to other travelers and hearing their perspectives, right? Like you and I are having this exchange right now, and we're learning from each other, and you learn from your podcast guests, and I learn from my podcast guests. And so I would encourage people just to subscribe to both of our podcasts, Manifest Travel, and then wherever you're listening to this, just type in The Maverick Show with Matt Bowles, and you can subscribe to that as well. I've also put together some cool free stuff for the Manifest Travel community. So if you guys are interested in the real estate stuff that we talked about, I have a real estate investing for digital nomads resource that will allow you, if you want to schedule a video consultation with us and talk more about it directly, you can. Or if you just want to read more about it and learn more about it, you can do that. I put a resource in here. This is all going to be at one link. I put a resource in here about how to build a fully remote business, even in a space that's not traditionally virtual, like the 7 core keys to doing that. And then just some other fun stuff like minimalist packing. I have a free training on that, which digital nomads often enjoy. So I put all of these free things in one place. So if you just want to go to themaverickshow.com/manifest travel, you can grab any of that and all of that completely for free.
Thank you so much. I'm sure my listeners are going to love that.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that episode. As usual, everything we discussed will be in the show notes, so you can just go to one place at themaverickshow.com and go to the show notes for this episode. And if you enjoyed Brittany's interview style, then wherever you are listening to this podcast right now, just type in Manifest Travel, and you can subscribe to Brittany's show as well. And if you like her podcast, please remember to leave her a rating and review, because she works extremely hard to put together a high quality show, and ratings and reviews really help podcasters out a lot. And if you'd like to follow her on Instagram and connect with her there, her handle is at Manifest Travel Pod. You can shoot her a DM and let her know what you thought about this episode. And with that, thank you for listening, and good night, everybody. All right. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Just a final reminder to subscribe to the Maverick Show's Monday Minute email newsletter. No long articles here, just 3 bullet points that I put together for you and drop into your email inbox every Monday that you can consume in under 60 seconds. You can subscribe at themaverickshow.com/newsletter. Again, that's themaverickshow.com/newsletter.